It begins with a sound so faint that most radios ignore it. A trembling pulse buried deep inside, static that feels older than the machine receiving it. In 1962, when the world was balancing on the edge of nuclear fire, a single forgotten frequency started whispering again from somewhere behind the Iron Curtain. The men who first heard it called it nothing more than interference. But the ones who listened closely understood something terrifying. Signals only repeat when someone wants them to be remembered. A young Soviet radio technician named Viktor Markov worked in a concrete bunker outside Minsk, buried beneath frozen soil and thick iron beams. He had no rank, no special clearance, and no idea that history was shifting quietly around him. His job was simple: log signals, record frequencies, report anomalies. Yet, on a night when the wind screamed like an animal outside, Victor heard something inside his headset that made his hands freeze above the console. It wasn't a broadcast. It wasn't Morse code. It was a series of pulses that formed a pattern he had seen only once before, inside a confiscated Western document labeled Classified Finance Structure. The pulses repeated again, slow, precise, deliberate, as if someone was tapping on the walls of the world. Victor followed the pattern deeper, adjusting dials until the static peeled apart like a curtain. Behind it, a voice emerged, not clear, not strong, but unmistakably real. It repeated a phrase in a language he couldn't identify. Not Russian, not English, not German. Yet the cadence felt hauntingly familiar, like the rhythm of a coded ledger. And then the voice vanished, leaving only the steady hum of dead air. But the fear stayed with him. Not because he understood the message, but because he recognized something in the background, a faint metallic echo he had heard only in stories about abandoned war shelters. He logged the frequency in the official book, and then he wrote it again in his private notebook. The next morning, 2 men in long coats arrived before sunrise. No insignia, no names, no expressions. They asked Victor to repeat the signal's details. He did. They asked if he recorded it. He lied. They swept the station with small devices, checking for hidden tapes or unauthorized equipment. Before leaving, one of them placed a folder on Victor's table. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence: "Do not follow the echo." But Victor couldn't ignore it, because the night after the men left, the signal returned, stronger, clearer, more demanding. This time, the voice was accompanied by a faint ticking sound, like a clock counting down time that had already passed. And when Victor matched the pulse pattern with his secret notebook, he noticed the codes formed a sequence resembling financial routing numbers. But they were too old to be active, too specific to be random, too familiar to be forgotten. That night, he broke protocol and traced the numbers across archived transmissions. Lines connected, patterns formed, signals from 1945, 1951, 1956, all originating from locations that no longer existed on any Soviet map. Places erased, villages buried, factories shut down without explanation. And every signal pointed toward one restricted zone in the Sudeten Mountains. A place abandoned during the war, but still guarded by patrols that claimed there was nothing left to guard. Victor's hands trembled as he realized something devastating. The signals weren't new. They were old, very old, repeating every decade, like someone trapped in a chamber was sending out the same warning again and again. He copied everything into his notebook and boarded a train the next morning, heading toward the mountains. The towns along the route looked hollow, their windows dark even in daylight. Locals avoided speaking to strangers, but an elderly woman selling bread recognized the notebook's numbers. She whispered that her father worked in a listening outpost during the war. He once said the mountains held something more dangerous than bombs or spies. A room built to store secrets that governments on both sides wanted buried. A chamber that spoke in echoes. The entrance was hidden inside a collapsed railway tunnel, overgrown with thorn vines. Rusted signs warned of unstable ground. But Victor pushed through, guided only by the faint hum of interference growing inside his radio. The tunnel smelled of old metal and forgotten dust. And somewhere ahead, a low vibration pulsed through the stone, syncing with the radio signal, as if the walls themselves were breathing. Behind a fallen support beam, Victor found a narrow doorway covered in frost. He forced it open and entered a small underground chamber, lined with cracked monitors and dead equipment. But one machine was still faintly humming. Its screen glowed with a heartbeat-like pulse. And as Victor approached, the signal flooded the room, washing the air with static and whispers. The voice returned, clearer than ever. Not recorded. Not repeated. Live, it spoke Victor's name. Before he could react, a second voice activated from an old transmitter behind him. This one was in Russian, cold and controlled. Step away from the console. Soldiers emerged from the shadows, guns raised. But Victor didn't move, because on the console screen, a message flickered, a series of numbers he recognized from a different story entirely. A code found inside a wartime notebook linked to a vanished gold train. A code connected to a man named Erich Muller. A code that should not exist in a Soviet bunker. Someone had tied their stories together long before either man was born. The soldiers approached, but the chamber lights suddenly flickered and a metallic scraping echoed from deeper inside the tunnels. Not footsteps, something heavier, something older, something awake. The soldiers hesitated, and in that hesitation, Victor reached forward and pressed the console's single active button. The signal amplified, shaking dust from the ceiling. The pulse turned into a coordinated pattern. A map formed on the cracked screen, a tunnel network, a vault, a word in the corner. The silent vault, the same phrase found in Erich's vault, under the mountains. The soldiers shouted. The machine sparked. The entire chamber trembled. But before everything went dark, Victor saw one last line flash on the screen, a warning spoken in the same unknown voice he had heard since the beginning. If this echo reaches the world, the vault will awaken. The lights died. The signal stopped. The chamber fell silent. When Victor opened his eyes, the soldiers were gone. The exits sealed. Only the faintest pulse remained in his radio, beating like a dying heart. But he wasn't afraid anymore, because he finally understood what the echo was. Not a distress call, not instructions, not a remnant of war, but a countdown. And as he walked deeper into the mountain tunnels, following the fading signal, he whispered the question no one had dared to ask. If this isn't the end of the Cold War, then what world were they really fighting for? The echo did not answer, but something in the darkness did.